Welcome everyone to this Proz virtual event. My name is Shana Pugh-Dean. I'm the translation manager for Tone. We are actually a nonprofit organization that's part of a refugee resettlement organization in upstate New York in the United States. Our goal for our organization is to help the integration of refugees and immigrants into the community. We really support language access, and we're very happy to have this opportunity today. We're going to be speaking about languages of limited diffusion with a particular focus on some translation trials and tribulations. If you're not familiar with languages of limited diffusion, or LLDs, they're languages that don't have many speakers in the local country, but for which there are some real language access needs. I will be speaking a lot about the United States today, but I know that this is also true in Europe and throughout the world. There are a lot of languages that may necessarily be spoken widely, but really need more focus on them to help reach more people. Translation is also local, and LLDs are relative as well. So, of course, a language of limited diffusion in Los Angeles is not the same as New York City, is not the same as Paris or Shanghai. It really depends where you are. So, you really do need to know your target audiences and what they need when it comes to languages of limited diffusion. LLDs are more commonly discussed in interpretation. The International Medical Interpreters Association actually has a minority languages, I think, division, but unfortunately, they use the term minority language, and that's not something that I really like to use. I think they're doing a great thing by having a specialized group to discuss it and look at it, but I do prefer the term LLD. And in the United States, the National Commission for Interpreting in Healthcare, which is one of the credentialing programs for healthcare interpretation in the United States, also has a group that focuses on this. But I think it would be important for more translation events to have a focus on languages of limited diffusion, because it's equally important in the translation field. There are obviously a lot more languages spoken that cannot be written that are LLDs, but at the same time, there are several languages, as we'll see, that have peculiarities and other things that really need more technical assistance. Translators and customers may not be aware of the type of opportunities and the markets out there, and today we're going to discuss some of those challenges, but also some of those opportunities. And in a world that's constantly on the move, there are a lot of migrant communities in the US and elsewhere where these languages of limited diffusion are really prevalent, and there really is a need for them to have equal language access. We're going to start off by discussing some of the challenges when working with languages of limited diffusion. We're going to talk about challenges for translators, challenges for LSPs or language service providers, and then also challenges for consumers or organizations and businesses that might want to have things translated into these languages. For translators, one of the big challenges if they're working in a language that is not widely spoken is that there's really limited technical assistance and support for these languages. This goes beyond just simply dictionaries or communities of support. There are several CAT tools, computer-assisted translation tools, that may not actually allow documents to be uploaded in that language. For example, we're going to be discussing some Southeast Asian languages, notably Burmese and Karen, and documents that have already been translated into these languages actually can't be uploaded into CAT tools because of segmentation issues. And so there are some technical challenges for translators working in this field. There's also limited terminology. The native language may not have the vocabulary that some other languages have. And there's also not necessarily the breadth of dictionaries or term bases that are available for individuals. And there may not even be an official body that's governing the language. So there may be discrepancies amongst individuals depending on when they were educated in school, at what point in time, and then what is currently going on in the country. Since some languages of limited diffusion are spoken in developing countries, there are still really questions of how that language is going to develop over time. If you're a translator, you may also need to learn Unicode. We will discuss this a little bit more, as this can be a challenge for you as a translator if you learn how to type your language, if it's a non-Roman alphabet or a language not widely spoken that uses a different alphabet. It may be a challenge to learn how to type in Unicode. And then there's also limited networks for you. Obviously, it may be hard to find individuals that have the linguistic ability to help check your work, or if you're asked to do a specialized or technical document, it may be challenging to find individuals that may know the context. We find this in the U.S. There's different communities that we may get asked to do a translation for, say, a casino here that has housekeeping services, and there's specific words used in the English context that even if people asked their contacts from their home country, they wouldn't necessarily know the context. And I know that's true for all languages, but it can be more challenging for those that speak languages of limited diffusion. There's also challenges for LSPs that want to work in some of these languages. It can be extremely difficult to find translators with the linguistic and technical knowledge. It's important to find them, but it is a challenge, especially if it's a language that is spoken in a developing country. Individuals may not have had access to the same technology as we've had in the United States or Western Europe or other developed countries. So even the concepts of computer-assisted translation tools may not be something they're completely comfortable with or familiar with. It's something they might need some extra support on. It's also important to know the target audience for the customer's material. If you're an LSP, you may get asked by a customer to translate something into one of these languages that are not widely spoken. But if you're not sure who the target audience is, you may really not get it correctly because there's varying preferences. And again, I know this happens with other languages as well, but again, because there's more technical support in those languages, it might be easier to find a solution. Sometimes you really need to know who you're trying to help. There may be issues resolving linguistic disputes. If you're a language company and you have translators, we have found that there are differences and variation between how someone wants to write it that may have been educated in the city versus how someone that wrote it in the country. And because there's no official body to govern that language, there has to be a resolution to that somehow. And oftentimes you have to bring in a third translator and have a discussion. And then there's also challenges for translator training. Again, I do feel that sometimes individuals that speak these languages, they have really great skills and it can really be an employment opportunity for people, but you do have to be willing to have a little bit more training and support. If you're an organization or business that's looking to have material translated into a language of limited diffusion, you really need to be careful. Not all the fonts for languages, as I'll discuss with Burmese or with Karen, or I have even found with Nepali or Hindi or other languages, the fonts are not mutually intelligible. So this means they can't easily be converted from one to the other. So in some languages around the world, maybe like English or Spanish or other alphabets that are more widely used by technology, you can highlight them and you can select a different font, and it doesn't actually change how the language is read or which characters show up. But if you are working in Burmese and you highlight the text and you change the font, you may have suddenly actually changed the entire coding in the computer. You have missing characters, you suddenly have information that's no longer there, and you might not know that if you're not familiar with the languages. Some people out there may again be saying, oh, well, if you're using Unicode, this isn't an issue. Well, it still can be an issue, as we'll discuss with Burmese. You need to be aware of machine translation. Sometimes large language companies might be using their CAT tool, which is a great tool, but again, are failing to see the target audience and contextually can miss things in languages of limited diffusion, even more so because the term bases aren't there to support that machine assistance. And even though Google might say that it offers Burmese, you could speak to a Burmese translator and they will tell you they cannot use Google Translate to even assist them. So again, there's that limited technical support. Faster is not always better. Some of these languages take twice as long to type, and so it may actually require a little bit longer lead time to complete projects. It's important that translators are given that extra time to get things right. Also, be aware of the target audience you're looking for. Again, there may be lower levels of literacy in some of these languages, and there may be different preferences of the target audience. You might say that's localization, but it's also could be a font issue. Even though Unicode may be widely viewed as the way to write a language, the preference for individuals viewing that language might not be how Unicode sees it, and this can create some challenges and discussion that needs to be worked through. And there's also the functionality of fonts in InDesign programs or Adobe Suite programs on websites and other publication options that you might have, and you may just tell a company you want it translated. But if you're working, again, in Burmese, Karen, Nepali, some other languages, and you send it to your design team, they could accidentally cut words in half and do other changes to the language that they might not be aware of because it's not so widely spoken. So we're going to talk about Burmese a little bit as one of the examples of a language of limited diffusion that is probably going to increase in terms of market and in terms of need. And even within the country, Burma is going to start to see a lot more people from there that will get involved in translation. You will hear me refer to it as Burma because I work with a lot of individuals that may have left the country at a time when they weren't welcome there. The country is changing and opening up, so it's usually referred to as Myanmar. But as you'll see in my bullet point 2, the language spoken and the country of origin are not always the same. And so this is the same with Burmese. It's still referred to as the Burmese language, but again, you'll see that the Unicode font is called Myanmar, and so this can cause some confusion. I know it aligns with the country name, and I'm sure there were some political angles at play at that time and why they chose that. But if you look up the language, it's referred to as Burmese. I consider Burmese as a language that was trying to, it's a round language that's trying to be fit into a square world. You can see an example of the language below, and that says welcome. And you can see the letters are pretty curvy, but this beautiful language that has those curves because it was originally written with palm leaves when it was first put down on paper, has been fit into this square technical computer world. And so it's been a bit of a challenge to take that language and actually code it so the characters come out correctly. And there's a lot of discussion still happening in Burma around the use of Unicode, and I do think it is a language rights issue that translators should be discussing. The conversation is happening in Burma, and more recently, in the last 15 to 16 years. As early as 10 years ago, there really wasn't a Unicode font that could be easily used on PCs or Macs, so again, it depends on what system you're using. There was a font called Zalji that was developed within the country for people to use on cellular platforms and to easily use on websites and in email. But then when Google came into the country several years ago, they told everyone they should start to use Unicode. And so there is actually still a big debate happening within the country of Myanmar or Burma, whichever you prefer, over what should be used, Zalji or Unicode. And tech companies have decided something different than the population. And this is really something to watch for those of us that are in the language field. Again, I know that large LSPs are using Unicode, but think of, again, that localization of what is preferred by company or by the local population. The other thing to keep in mind is even for Unicode, it might not always look proper on different internet platforms, depending on the version, the year of the Internet Explorer you have, or the Google Chrome you're using. And so there's a lot of different challenges going on there with the Burmese language that really need to be looked at, and there needs to be more discussion around this, which translators and add language accompaniments. I'm also going to highlight the Karen language as another language. It's from Burma, and it uses the same alphabet as the Burmese language, but it is a separate language. One of the arguments for actually using Unicode is that it allows for the creation of more of the ethnic languages in Burma than the Zhaoji font does. However, you will find that there are several translators with really great language skills throughout the US and maybe still in Burma that learned how to type in a keyboard that is not Unicode compliant. And so they use a font called KNU that they prefer. And you can see the font here that's actually in KNU and not Unicode. And so again, it's that challenge as translators to learn a new keyboard. But I'm highlighting Karen here in this example for the segmentation issues as another challenge for this language and for some others from Southeast Asia, such as Lao. I believe there are a few others that have difficulty with segmentation in some of the CAD tools. What's interesting in this example is you can see there are commas here. The commas are there because in the US, when the Karen translate, they will take on English punctuation and they will put it into the translation. However, if this were just written in Karen, those commas would not exist. You can see in this last line here where the segmentation issues come in. The last line is wood carving and others, and you cannot tell where one word begins and another word ends. If you're Karen and you read the language, obviously you can, and usually this little dot here is the end of a sentence or a full paragraph or subparagraph, but prior to that you wouldn't know necessarily where to break the word in half. Say if you're working in a design program, you could split something where it doesn't belong. So you can see with this language why it's important if you're sending this to designers that you have individuals that really recognize the language, or you actually send it back to the translator to view as the final, because you want to make sure the characters are still together where they should be. We actually had an example in New York State where our state government brought a pamphlet that had been translated by a large company. And I know I'm saying a lot about large companies, you do great work. I don't want to think that I don't like them, but as an example, this had been translated and the local population couldn't understand anything because they used a lot of Unicode and there was definitely some machine translation involved and the characters were not split properly, and so we actually had to retranslate the document using local knowledge and language of real human translators on the ground. So it is really important in some of these languages of limited diffusion to really make sure you have good language experts and rely on their knowledge. So we've discussed a lot of the challenges with LLDs. We're going to finish with discussing some of the opportunities for translators, LSPs, and also businesses and organizations that would like to work with these languages. Opportunities if you're a translator is that you can be highly valued in a growing market. Some of these languages are going to continue to grow in demand. A lot of them might be from Southeast Asia or Africa or even parts of South America that are opening up to more commerce and tourism, and you will be valued if you have the language skills. So I would definitely invest
I'll be doing that this
learning more
morning.
technical information.
I had not had a
You can
chance yet,
potentially
but
be a language expert.
it's
if
it's not
you
too
put in
much.
the
So
time
either way, I think
to
with their deadline.
educate yourself about your own language and the target language that you're working in.
Thank you,
You
Svetlana,
can
very
really
much.
become someone that companies rely on and find a lot of work. You can even become a cultural advisor beyond just the translation work. Some companies do cultural advising. That's something that Tone does. And so we're looking for people that have that extra knowledge, and that's an extra source of employment for you as well. And you can be a part of language access for some of these communities, especially if they're migrant communities or they're communities that usually haven't had a lot of support in their home country, but really need language access. You really become a great resource for them, and you help move their opportunities forward. For anyone that's interested, we are looking for translators at Tone. in languages of limited diffusion as well as more widely spoken languages. So please join Team Tone by visiting tonetranslate.com. There's also opportunities if you're a language service provider. You can really become a valuable player in a niche market if you decide to really focus in on some of these languages of limited diffusion. Again, some of them are really growing in demand, and you can really uh, become a company that's used really widely for a few of these languages because other ones are not doing it. Increase your localization skills, learning more about the audience, learning more about the country, what the individuals want. As I discussed before, just because a cat tool or some other technology has that language, don't assume that's what the people prefer there. It might be easier to work in those, what the technology has developed, but it might be more helpful to actually find out what the people there would prefer. And you could be the first to potentially offer language access for individuals speaking a language of limited diffusion. And there's also opportunities if you're consumers, if you're an organization or a business and you really want to reach new markets, really look at what languages of limited diffusion are growing and where. There are diaspora communities and migrant communities in other countries where as a translator you might find work, but also if you're a business or organization in that community, you might actually realize you should have some material translated to reach these new markets and individuals. And you can increase your trust in products and services by having information translated in a language that the people that speak it might not expect. They probably expect that they're not going to find information in their language. So when they do see that organization or a service the initiative to get information translated in the language they prefer, they're really going to see you as someone that cares about their community. There might be a decrease actually in language errors, and what I mean by this is again the use of all of that machine translation that is important if you find out what your target audience wants and needs, and it's a greater opportunity for you as a business or organization to really reach your goals. If you're in a community where some of these languages are spoken, such as Burmese or Karen, or there may be other languages out there, it's really a chance for you to reach more of your goals and reach more people. And together we can all create more opportunity in a world I want to thank you all for joining this Proz virtual event. You can see on my thank you page an error that commonly occurs with Karen. You can copy and paste it, and it can show up as just letters that don't mean anything. Underneath those letters that don't mean anything, you can see the actual Karen script that should show up there. But again, it doesn't transfer into all programs, and it's something to really watch out for. I thank you all for your time today, and I hope we can really further a discussion on languages